Everything stopped, not gradually, suddenly. Connections that were active fell silent. Messages that should have returned did not return. Plans that seemed certain simply did not move forward. Doors that were opening closed without announcement, without explanation, without the courtesy of a clear reason. And you stood in the middle of it all trying to understand what you did wrong. Because the first thing the mind does when movement stops is to look for the flaw. What mistake did I make? What should I have said differently? Did I miss a window? Did I let something pass? The surrounding silence begins to feel like a verdict, and the slowness begins to feel like evidence of something you fear naming aloud, that perhaps you are not on the right path, that perhaps life has moved on without notifying you. But what if what you are calling a pause is not a failure? What if what feels like a freeze is, in fact, the most specific and intentional type of movement? The kind that happens in a dimension you have not yet learned to read with precision. And what if what feels like an alarm is, in fact, cover? This video is not about how to force movement back. It is about why forcing it now would be exactly the most expensive mistake you could make at this moment. And it is about what to do with the space you have been given. Because there is something happening in it that you will not be able to see as long as your energy is focused on undoing it. Stay here, because what comes now will change the way you read this period. And when the reading changes, the weight of the silence changes with it. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now before continuing, not as a formality, as a deliberate positioning. This space was built for those who arrived here tired of the noise and ready to learn to inhabit the silence with sovereignty. Let us begin. The anxiety produced by the pause. There is research conducted by neuroscientists at the Cognitive Neuroscience Laboratory of UFRJ that documented something anyone over 35 recognizes viscerally, but rarely manages to articulate with precision. The human nervous system, when conditioned by years of constant productivity and continuous movement, begins to treat the absence of stimulus and progress as an active threat.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.
Not as rest, as danger. In other words, when everything stops, the body reads the pause as a problem before processing any other information. The heart accelerates. The mind begins to fill the silence with scenarios. The anxiety you feel during a period of forced stillness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is the sign that your system has been trained not to tolerate the pause as a legitimate state. And the training began early. Since school, where stopping meant failing. Since the first job, where stopping meant dismissal. Since relationships, where stopping meant losing. Each phase of modern life installed in you the equation. Movement equals progress and pause equals loss. And this equation became so deeply engraved that now, when life imposes a period of slowness, the system automatically interprets it as failure before any real analysis. Sebre released revealing data on the behavior of Brazilian entrepreneurs and professionals during periods of uncertainty. More than 70% of respondents reported that the greatest difficulty was not the absence of opportunities, but the inability to tolerate the weight without taking precipitous actions that, in most cases, sabotaged the opportunities that were about to materialize. Impatience was not a lack of faith. It was a lack of training to inhabit the space between one cycle and the next. This space has a name in the sacred text, and when you learn the name, it stops feeling empty. The Hebrew word is selah, You find it repeated dozens of times throughout the Psalms, interspersed between verses of praise, of lament, of declaration, and most translations simply do not translate it. They leave the space blank, or put the word in italics without explanation, because the translators were not sure how to capture what it means. The most likely root comes from salal, to lift up, to weigh, to measure. Selah is a musical and theological instruction at the same time. Stop, lift up, weigh what has just been said before continuing. In the Psalms, Selah does not appear in quiet moments. It appears right after the densest declarations, after the confession of sin, after the cry in despair, after the recognition of a truth that is too great to be absorbed in movement. It is as if the sacred text understood that there is a type of revelation that can only be received in the deliberate pause, and that trying to advance before Selah is to advance without having absorbed what the previous stage produced. The stillness you are living may be a Selah that was inserted into your narrative, not to delay you, but to ensure that you have absorbed enough of what the previous cycle taught you before entering the next, with the same weight on your back that you brought to the previous one. But there is something else happening here, and it is neurological before it is spiritual. What happens in the brain when movement stops? The Max Planck Institute for Hirnforschung, the Max Planck Institute for Brain Research in Germany, published research that turned conventional productivity logic upside down. The human brain does not process complex information more efficiently when it is in constant activity. It processes it during what neuroscientists call the active rest state, the moment when the brain's default mode network is operating. It is not the brain turned off. It is the brain integrating, consolidating, connecting patterns that conscious and intentional activity cannot connect because it is too busy with the next step. In practical language, the great syntheses, the moments of clarity about who you are, where you are going, and what really matters, do not arrive during the rush. They arrive in the shower. They arrive in the silence of the early morning. They arrive on the walk without headphones. They arrive in the spaces that the modern system treats as useless because they do not produce immediate measurable output. What you experience as an unproductive pause may be, neurologically, the period of greatest deep processing you have crossed in years. Your system is integrating what the previous cycles produced in terms of knowledge, wounds, and formation. And this integration needs an environment that constant movement does not offer. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, linked to research in expanded cognition and contemplative states, documented that periods of forced stillness, those that arrive not by choice but by circumstance, frequently precede the greatest leaps of clarity and reorientation in adults who have gone through phases of high pressure. Not because stillness itself produces clarity, but because it removes the noise that was preventing the already available clarity from being perceived. In other words, the answer you were seeking in movement may have been available in the silence all along. You just could not hear it because there was enough noise to cover it. There is a second Hebrew word that needs to enter your vocabulary now. Nuach, NVHA, conventionally translated as to rest, but in the original Hebrew, Nuach is not passivity. It is the movement of something that was out of place being put in the correct place. The word is used to describe Noah's Ark when it finally landed on Mount Ararat. Not the boat stopped, but the boat arriving at the exact point to which it had been led during the entire journey across the waters. Nuach is the rest that happens when you arrive, where you were destined to arrive at this stage. When you are in Nuach, even if it feels like a pause, even if it feels like stagnation, you are not wasting time. You are landing. You are arriving at a necessary anchoring point that constant movement was preventing you from reaching because constant movement and deep anchoring are mutually exclusive. You do not anchor a boat while sailing at maximum speed. The stillness that has come to you is not abandonment, it is landing. And now I need to show you 3 people who went through exactly this and who understood what was happening only after crossing the pause, not before. The 3 who were stopped before being sent. The pattern is ancient, so ancient that when you begin to see it in the sacred text, you begin to suspect that it is not an exception, it is protocol. Those who carried high-impact capacity were systematically subjected to periods of apparent pause before the moments of greatest action, not as punishment, as preparation of a quality that movement cannot produce. Elijah. the prophet who had just performed one of the most dramatic moments in all recorded history, the duel on Mount Carmel, where fire descended upon the soaked altar before 450 prophets of Baal and an entire nation watching in suspense. The moment of greatest public manifestation of Elijah's spiritual power in his entire life. And what happened right after? He fled. He fell under a juniper tree in the desert and asked to die. It is not a figure of speech. The text of 1 Kings 19 records his declaration with disconcerting accuracy. "It is enough, Lord. Take my soul." The sequence of high performance followed by complete collapse. Human logic would expect the prophet to celebrate, expand, and advance upon the moment of victory. Instead, he was lying on the ground, exhausted beyond any resilience, asking for the end. And what did the Eternal do? He did not rebuke him for his weakness. He did not remind him of what he had just accomplished. He did not pressure him to continue. He sent an angel to touch him. Once, twice, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for thee." Food, water, sleep repeated. Not revelation, not mission, not strategy for the next step. Basic physical care before anything else. And later, in the cave on Mount Horeb, the question of the Eternal did not come in the strong wind that rent the mountains. It did not come in the earthquake. It did not come in the fire. It came in a still, small voice. In Hebrew, Kol Demama Daka, literally the sound of thin silence, the lowest possible frequency, the type of communication that is only received by those who are quiet enough to hear it. What the story of Elijah says to you is not that you are in collapse. It is that there is a voice that can only find you when the wind, the earthquake, and the fire have stopped. The Eternal was not in the dramatic events, he was in the silence that came after. And if you are in a period of stillness now, it may be that the most important instruction of your life is about to arrive on a frequency that the previous movement was covering. If you have reached this point, and this description named something you have been feeling without being able to articulate, leave a like now. This gesture is not about engagement. It is your recognition that this content needs to reach those who are exactly where you were before pressing play. Now Moses, the Prince of Egypt, with access to the most sophisticated power of the civilization of his time, educated in Pharaoh's court, endowed with intellectual and leadership capacity that the text itself records as incomparable, who committed an irrecoverable error and fled. To Midian, not for days, for 40 years. 40 years of shepherding in the desert. 40 years of a man who had been formed to lead nations, tending the flocks of another man in a land that was not his own, far from everything that had defined his previous identity. 40 years in which, seen from the outside, it seemed that Moses had simply disappeared, that the potential had been wasted, that the window had closed. And it was exactly at the furthest point, at the most improbable angle of the desert, that the bush burned. Not when Moses was preparing for the moment, not when he had a plan, not when he had felt sufficiently formed for the calling. The calling arrived when Moses had clearly stopped waiting for it. What the 40 years in Midian produced in Moses is not visible on the surface of the narrative, but it is detectable in the consequences. The Moses who entered Egypt with the authority to confront Pharaoh directly was not the impulsive prince who had killed an Egyptian, trying to resolve the situation with his own strength. He was someone who had learned the only type of patience that the desert teaches, the patience that has no other option but to wait, and that in compulsory waiting discovers that the wait was not empty. IBGE recorded, in surveys on professional and life transitions in Brazilian adults between 35 and 55 years old, that periods of involuntary transition, job loss, end of a relationship, illness, forced relocation, are consistently evaluated retrospectively by those who cross them as the periods of greatest clarity about purpose and identity. Not during, after. Clarity was not available while the pressure was active. It was being formed under the surface while life seemed stopped. This is the pattern of Moses. The desert was not punishment for a failure. It was the only environment capable of producing the type of leadership that Egypt was going to demand. And then Paul. Perhaps the most disturbing example of all for those trying to make sense of a period of pause, because Paul was, objectively, one of the best prepared and most energetically urgent brains of the first century Mediterranean world. When the encounter on the road to Damascus happened, Paul did not stay still for 3 days waiting for what to do. The first thing the text of Galatians records that he did was go to Arabia, not to Jerusalem, where the apostles were, where the leadership of the church was, where the people were with whom he could have built immediate validation for what he had just received. To Arabia, to the silence, to a period that Paul himself mentions as if it were obvious that it needed to happen, but that almost no theological commentary can completely explain, because there is simply no record of what happened there. There was a revelation that could not be received in movement. There was an understanding of who Paul now was that could not be built in conversations with those who had known who Paul was before. There was a period of integration that needed to happen out of reach of any audience, any expectation, any pressure to perform the calling before fully inhabiting it. And when Paul emerged from Arabia, when the period of silence ended and movement returned, what came out of that process was a theological and pastoral clarity that altered the course of Western civilization. Not the same Paul, accelerated, a new, integrated Paul. The depth of what emerged was proportional to the depth of the pause that preceded it. What these three, Elijah, Moses, Paul, have in common is not the grandeur of public moments. It is that each of them went through a period of apparent freezing that, seen from the inside, looked like failure or stagnation, and that, seen later, revealed itself to be the most critical formation period of their entire trajectory. You are not outside of this pattern. You are inside it, what the Greek says about the rest you need. Before reaching the practical protocol, I need you to absorb one more word, because it will change the type of rest you seek during this period. In the Greek of the New Testament, the word translated as rest in the promise of Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," is anapao. Anapavo. It is not simply ceasing activity. The root pao means to stop, and the prefix ana means back to, above, again. Anapao is the rest that restores, that repositions, that lifts back to the state that existed before the overload installed the wear and tear. Not a rest that leaves you where you were. A rest that returns you to who you were before the previous cycle consumed layers of you that were not meant to be consumed. And there is a third Hebrew word that completes the vocabulary of this episode, bina, translated as understanding or discernment, but which in the original Hebrew carries the image of construction. The root bana means to build. Bina is the type of comprehension that builds, that does not just process information, but organizes it into a structure that sustains the next movement. Bina is the understanding that you only get when there is enough mental space for the scattered elements of your experiences to organize into a coherent pattern. It is exactly what the brain's default mode network does during periods of active rest. It is what the desert did in Moses for 40 years. It is what Arabia did in Paul. It is what the cave did in Elijah. It is what the pause you are living can do in you, if you stop spending the energy of silence trying to undo the silence. Bina is not received in movement. It is the product of Selah applied with consistency. And when Bina is formed, when the deep understanding that builds is installed, the next step you take will have a different quality from any previous step. Not more urgent, more exact. The protocol of inhabiting the pause. This is the point where most spiritual content about pause and waiting dissolves into beautiful phrases without practical substance. I will not do that. You deserve the concrete protocol, what to do with the space you have received so that it produces what it is destined to produce. The first movement is to stop measuring the period of pause with the instruments of the period of movement. The most common mistake people make during an involuntary Selah is to continue using the metrics of the previous cycle to evaluate the current period. Number of connections made, amount of visible progress, speed of return on initiatives. These are metrics of movement, and applied to a period of repositioning, they consistently produce a wrong reading. The period will look like failure because you are using the wrong instrument to measure it. The correct metric for a period of pause is different. What am I managing to perceive that was not perceptible before? What kind of clarity is arriving in the spaces that the previous noise covered? What patterns am I managing to recognize in the choices of the last few years that the accelerated pace did not allow me to observe with enough distance? The pause produces perspective, and perspective does not appear in productivity reports, but it determines the quality of all future decisions. The second movement is to distinguish between rest and escapism. Nuach, the rest that positions, is not the same thing as anesthesia. There is a structural difference between using silence to integrate what previous cycles produced and using silence to escape the discomfort of not having movement. The first produces bina. The second produces more internal noise with less external noise, which is even harder to navigate because it has no obvious exit. During a period of productive pause, you are not distracting yourself from the silence. You are inhabiting the silence with intention. This can mean deliberate periods of reflection, not rumination, which is the endless mental cycle, but structured review. What did I learn? What do I repeat that does not work? What was I about to repeat again before this pause arrived? This review, done without haste and without judgment, is what transforms Sela into Bina. Go to the comments now and write one word, pause, in capital letters. Not as resignation to what is stopped, as a declaration that you recognize this space as sacred and choose to inhabit it with sovereignty, not with anxiety. Pause is your first active response to what seemed like passivity. It is you saying, I recognize the Sela. I am here, and I am learning to hear what only arrives in the thin silence. The third movement is to sharpen discernment about what resumes and what stays behind. Not everything that was in movement before the pause should return to movement after the pause. One of the most important functions of the freezing period is to reveal, with a clarity that the accelerated pace makes impossible, which of your energy investments, relationships, projects, commitments, identities are aligned with who you truly are, and which are remnants of a previous version of you that was moving by inertia, by obligation, or by fear of the void. Research from the Behavioral Neuroscience Group at PUCRS on decision-making in high-pressure states and in states of stillness documented something that confirms spiritual intuition. The quality of decisions made in silence after an adequate period of reflection is consistently superior to the quality of decisions made under pressure of deadline and perceived urgency. Discernment, Bina, is not compatible with the urgency of having to decide now. It needs the space that Sela opens. The fourth movement is to prepare what will be planted when movement returns. The period of pause is not the period of harvest, but it is the period in which the seed of the next harvest can be prepared with a care that movement does not allow. What do you want to grow when the soil of the next cycle is available? What kind of relationships? What kind of commitments? What kind of contribution? The pause is the moment when you can make these choices with Bina, with the understanding that builds, instead of making them under the pressure of what was urgent in the previous cycle. Activate the notification bell now, because the next video will be the necessary complement to this one, and it will be specific in a way you will not want to miss. We will talk about the moment when the freeze begins to thaw, what happens when movement returns, how to recognize that the right door is opening instead of repeating the cycle with new-looking doors, and how to enter the next movement with the identity formed in the pause, not with the identity that entered it. This video will be the difference between leaving Sela with Bina and leaving Sela with urgency disguised as faith. Activate the bell to be here when it comes out. What the freeze is protecting. I need to talk about something that the premise of this episode raises powerfully, and that deserves attention not as a declaration of what is definitely happening in your specific life, but as a pattern to examine with honesty. It is possible that some of the doors that closed before this pause did not close by accident or by wrong timing. It is possible that some of them carried costs that would only be visible after paying the entry price, relationships with dynamics you could not yet read clearly, commitments that would have consumed energy that now needs to be available for another direction, speeds of advancement that your current level of preparation could not yet sustain with integrity. I am not declaring that it is so. I am inviting you to ask with honesty, during this period of silence, is there any door that closed that, looking with the distance that the pause offers, does not cost me as much as it seemed it would? Is there any silence that arrived that brought, along with the discomfort, a lightness I did not expect, because there is a type of protection that is only recognizable after it has been exercised. The cover that prevents error does not arrive announced. It arrives as inexplicable resistance, as a coincidence of blocks, as silence where there should be a response. And only in retrospect, with the perspective that Selah produces, is it possible to distinguish what was protection from what was merely delay. Elijah did not understand what the cave was serving while he was inside it. Moses did not know that the desert was forming the deliverer of Israel while he shepherded another's flocks in Midian. Paul did not publish a diary of Arabia because there was nothing to publish. There was only the silent formation that would make everything that came after intelligible. And when the bush burned for Moses, when the moment of exit from the pause arrived, he did not need to rush to make sense of what had happened during the 40 years. The 40 years had done the work on their own. What was formed was formed. What was integrated was integrated. The Bina was installed. And he entered the next movement, not as the anxious prince who had fled Egypt, but as the shepherd who had learned the only type of patience capable of sustaining the leadership of a people through decades of crossing in the same desert that had formed his character. The freeze you are living is not the end of your story. It is the formation period that the next chapter will demand you to have crossed. The foundation of the new rhythm. There is something you will need to decide before movement returns, and the decision is more important than any strategy to accelerate the return of movement. The rhythm you will adopt in the next cycle will be defined by a choice: urgency or sovereignty. Urgency is the rhythm of chronic beta, of productivity as a response to fear, of movement as an escape from stillness. Sovereignty is the rhythm of nuach, of the rest that positions, of the movement that is born from clarity and not from pressure, of the action that comes out of bina and not from anxiety. You spent years in a rhythm that the system around you defined, the cycle of rushing, of overload, of constant movement that ended up producing the pause you are living. That cycle was not chosen deliberately. It was inherited, installed, maintained by inertia and by fear that stopping meant losing. The pause broke the cycle. But breaking the cycle is different from choosing the next rhythm. The next rhythm needs to be chosen with the clarity that Selah produced, with the discernment that silence sharpened, with the identity that emerged from the period of integration. And the next rhythm needs to have space built into it for future Selahs, for the pauses that are not emergencies, but are maintenance, for the caves of Elijah before the collapse, not after, for the Arabia of Paul before exhaustion forces the retreat, not as a consequence of it, for the regular nuach that prevents the system from accumulating enough overload to produce a total freeze. The new rhythm is not slower, it is smarter. It is not less productive, it is more sustainable. And it is built on the foundation that the period of pause is solidifying now, while you learn to inhabit the silence with sovereignty instead of with terror. If you know someone who is in the middle of a period of forced pause and is interpreting it as failure, someone who is carrying the weight of silence without having the vocabulary to name what the silence is doing, send this video to that person now, not later, because the Selah you have already crossed gave you perspective that someone inside the pause does not yet have. And sharing that perspective now is the first act of the nuach that positions you for the next cycle, returning what the period of stillness produced in you, transformed into cover for those still in the middle of the process. See you in the next video, and I promise it will arrive exactly when it needs to.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.